Good evening, this is the Art Scene. I'm your host, Lila Snow. I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I just turned 90, and a friend said, when you're 90, you do something. So this is the something, because people think that I have words of wisdom, that I learned something after 90 years. Ha! All I can say is people want to give you advice. Never thought my mother's sewing had anything to do with my work. And once I was working on a collage and turning a piece, and I have an image of my mother trying to make a little piece of cloth work to end up being a child's jacket. So it's very closely tied to my work. I'm going to start with an installation of particle painting, as in elementary particle, and scienza, my work, which will be at the new Physical Sciences Complex at the University of Maryland. It's a permanent installation. The building is closed on weekends. Along with the two artworks will be a plaque about the late Professor George A. Snow, who was the first director of the High-Energy Physics Group at Maryland, and about my history as an artist and performances at art and physics events. I was a chemist before I became an artist, and I constantly am reminded about how useful that is. You really are sort of working in a laboratory format, and you have to know how the materials interact, and it's amazing how close that is. I felt so at home, as if I was back in the lab. Tonight, I have a new backdrop. It's my work called The Love Game, and it's made from boxes that used to hold physics instruments. So we spent a lot of time in Italy, and then in 1965-66, we lived in Rome. My husband had a Guggenheim and a Fulbright. I have a photograph of us while we were looking for an apartment in Rome. But while we were in the hotel, we lived near Santa Maria della Minerva. It's a church famous because there's a gold sculpture of Christ by Michelangelo. But it's also famous, especially among physicists, because that's where Galileo was taken to be questioned. I'm going to start with a big show at American University. The museum's entire first floor, which is enormous, is going to have a show about the Washington Women's Art Center. Lucy Blankstein was the director. At the same time, I was associate director. There are 18 interviews of the leaders. There are 100 artists. I'm going to have two pieces from the permanent collection, anti-war pieces called Ici et Tombe, rubbings from the streets of Paris.
And I thought it was appropriate, Judith, to start with Lila Snow. Of course, these are two pieces up here, and they were actually made in 1972 in Paris in response to the United States bombing in Hanoi of the French embassy, where several people, including the ambassador, were killed. And this is her response to that action. And it's quite wonderful. It's Ici est tombé.
Yes.
And that means here has fallen. And so it's kind of like a grave marker, but it's also like a kite. It's like something that was used in a demonstration, but it also has religious significance. Those are rubbings from the tombstones in Christian, Muslim, and Jewish cemeteries.
Right.
So
Multi-faith.
making the point of everybody being involved in this tragic war.
I'm going to start with Group 93 having the show at American University in the Rotunda. It's available whenever the building is open, unlike the museum, which has hours. There are 17 artists, quite a variety, former faculty, people with MFAs and bachelor's degrees, and artists who just took some courses. I've been asked how I got into performing, so I thought I would tell you that my grandmother lived with us, and she was the neighborhood wit. She would say things and the neighbors would roar with laughter, and I thought, oh, I want that for myself. She'd sit in the window and make comments about the people walking by on East 17th Street in Brooklyn. And she knew a joke to go with almost everything that happened. She also knew old sayings like, if the rich could get the poor to die for them, the poor could earn a good living. Well, I went on to perform at physics conferences. Instead of the usual banquet once in New York City at the Hilton Hotel, actually shared the show with Tom Lehrer, but there was a physicist's wife. I was her secret weapon, and she had me on as the 3,000-year-old woman who knew Archimedes and Leonardo. And this was actually written up in the New York Times by Israel Schenker, an article called Physicist as a Soft Shoe. When I wrote my memoir, I called it with a name like Tuchmacher, because my grandmother's maiden name was Tuchmacher, and I figured with a name like Tuchmacher, it better be funny. Oh, and I did promise an elephant sandwich joke. So this is also part of the times, because when Russia first had tourism in the 60s, a man goes into a restaurant and the waiter says, "You may have heard we have shortages, but we don't have shortages. Order anything." And the man says, "Okay, I'll have an elephant and onion sandwich." So the waiter goes to the kitchen and comes back and says, "How about an onion sandwich?" And the man says, "You said there were no shortages. What's going on?" And the waiter says, "There are no shortages. The chef just said that he doesn't want to cut up a whole elephant just for one sandwich." We were a family of comedians. Woody Allen went to Midwood High School, which was the next high school over to mine in Brooklyn, Madison High School, where Bernie Sanders went and Chuck Schumer went. As far as being comedians, I asked my mother to take pains with the skirt that she was making for me. So she sat at the sewing machine groaning the whole time. And when I was an undergraduate at Brooklyn College, I belonged to a group called People's Songs. Actually, if you Google Margot Mayo, there's a tiny clip of me dancing. Well, the State Department decided to do a documentary about American culture. It was one of the first. And so they had the People's Songs dance group go to, there's a famous photographer for Life magazine, John Milley. This was photographed in his studio. And we had Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie. We had a guest of Leadbelly, who has become sort of a cult figure. And there was Union songs like "I Dreamed I Saw Joe Hill Last Night," and we danced, and Pete Seeger sang. And one of the songs, Woody Guthrie wrote a song about the migrants who went down. They used old propeller planes at a time in '48 when not many people were traveling with planes, but this old plane went down over Los Gatos, and Woody Guthrie wrote a song about you didn't have a name when you rode the old airplane. All they called you was deportees, because they didn't list the names. Actually, they recently uncovered the names. So that was a heady time. So back to Yiddish, because when I read the column, I thought of my booby, who sat in the window on East 17th Street in Brooklyn and made comments about life, very wise sayings, like the girl across the street who babysat for a family on that street ran away with the father of the children. And of course, that was the scandal of East 17th Street. So to make things look better, her mother bragged to my mother that he just bought her a new car. And my grandmother, we had just bought our first ridiculously old, non-functioning car. But I had a young husband, and my grandmother said, it's better to have an old car and a young husband than a young car and an old husband. So here are some gems from Yiddish, and I have to start with chutzpah and schnurres, because it's just incredible how many people will do the most outrageous things. I heard about kids in a cafeteria who are given a hot meal, and when they get to the cashier, it's revealed that their parents are in arrears paying. So it's thrown in the trash, because once one kid has touched it, it can't be used. And they're given a cold sandwich, so everyone knows that her parents are too poor to pay for the lunch. And when I lived in the poor Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn, there were kids who got free shoes, and no one wore tennis shoes, or Nikes were out of the question, but kids wore brown shoes. And so they gave these poor kids black shoes, and they came in white boxes. I was 8 years old, and I remember they were squirreled away and never worn, because it was part of a shaming thing that was happening to them. See you next time on Yard Scene. This is Lila.